The leadership race for the ANC Women's League leadership position is underway at the Nasrec Expo Centre in Johannesburg. Attention has mostly been on the presidential position previously occupied by Bathabile Dlamini. Her hopes to retain it may be dashed as she received the least branch nominations. She's trailing behind Sisisi, Tolashe and Thembeka Mchunu. The adoption of the policies discussed will most likely take place virtually after the meeting's completion. For some analysis, we're now joined by Lukhanyo Vangqa, a political analyst. Lukhanyo, appreciate your time. Now, Baleka Mbete, the convener of the ANC Women's League, called on delegates at the conference to set aside factionalism and focus on improving the conditions for South African women. How do you think factionalism within the ANC has affected the Women's League?
Hugo, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. Factionalism has really become endemic in the ANC. I call that organization a factionalized organization because you'll never rise to any position of power or responsibility in the ANC unless you belong to a faction and that faction has propelled you to that position, and then you become you owe your allegiance forever to that faction. And that has affected the ANC Women's League in the same way as well. But Baleka Mbete speaks about it, the 2007 conference, where the factional intrigue of the ANC slipped into the ANC Women's League. And the same thing happened in 2017. And the same thing is continuing now, because Sisisi Tolashe as well, herself, is not being propelled to that position out of her own merit to the ANC Women's League. It's because she's seen to be close to the CR faction, which is currently dominant inside of the ANC. And that's why she has received the numbers that she has received. And in comparison, Bathabile Dlamini has received about 5 times less. I mean, a former president of an ANC Women's League can be 5 times less popular than the challenger is. So you can really see that the factional processes and battles at play in the background in that organization. And I think this is going to continue to afflict both the ANC Women's League and the ANC itself, because they're not willing to free themselves from the intrigues of factionalism.
Well, yesterday we heard ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula speaking to some issues, and he encouraged the women to steer clear of the influences of men when voting. Is this him actually saying this, or is it just one of those situations where he doesn't actually mean what he says? What is your take on that?
It's political speak, as President Ramaphosa would say. It's just words, but they have no meaning when they are said. Fikile Mbalula is one of the people that are said to be, behind some of the factionalism that slipped into the Women's League. As far back as 2007, he himself, during his address yesterday, said the same thing about how they went to go marshal the women behind their own factional interests in 2007. And that time he belonged to the Jacob Zuma faction that dethroned President Mbeki. So even now he's marshalling the women behind the factional interests of the CR faction inside of the ANC. So these are just words. You need, I think, a leadership that rises organically through the ranks of their own organization. And that's when you can say the ANC has been able to liberate itself from factionalism. But as long as you rise to the position that you occupy on the back or carried by the wind of a faction behind you, the organization will remain factionalized. You will remain indebted to that faction, and it will just continue as it was. And the ANC really needs to look very deeply and introspect about the scourge of factionalism and how much it has damaged that organization.
Well, Lukhanyo, educate us a little bit as a political analyst. Now, when we talk about factions, we're obviously speaking to groupings of individuals within a political party, ones that prefer one side of an equation or one side of the coin, and the other that prefers the opposite side. Isn't it natural within political setups that you will have factions, or that you will have 2 sides, one for and one against?
No. Factions, the way we understand them, are those that have sectarian interests, that they have really personalized interest about rising to power, and they establish these sort of chains of largesse, and they establish these links within the organization to drive their particular personal agendas. But ideological differences within an organization don't really lead to factions, but they lead to ideological blocks within the organization, and that's why the ANC can say or call itself a broad church. But you have people from different persuasions that will have ideological differences or be on a spectrum with regards to ideological differences. The difference with a faction is that those interests are not principled interests or policy interests. In a faction, they are always about positions. They are always about personalities. So that's how you differentiate between a faction and an ideological bloc within an organization.
Well, moving away from the politics to the administrative side of it, now the start of the ANC Women's League's elective conference was delayed due to registration backlogs. Now, what challenges might arise from such delays? And that seems to be a common thread in many of the elective ANC conferences that we've witnessed over the last few months.
Yes, Hugo, the logistical challenges in these conferences for the ANC is something that needs to be looked into, because the ANC is left politically poorer by the fact that their conferences, national conferences, are reduced only to conferences about positions and personalities and people. And there's really no or little discussion about policies, about values, about ideological inclinations of the organization, about driving future strategies of the organization. The ANC used to call these national conferences, Hugo, festivals of ideas, wherein the most basic unit of the ANC, which is the branch, they congregate together and they add to the ideological direction of the organization. They add to the strategic direction and tactics of the organization. That is not happening anymore in these conferences. All we see is that they gather together, they elect leadership, and they go home, and everything else is left in the back burner in terms of the things that really move the needle in the political life of the organization. And as a result of that, I think the ANC is left politically poorer by conferences that are gathered or are organized in this manner.
Now, the ANC Women's League conference is called to replace leadership, including the outgoing president, Bathabile Dlamini. What qualities and priorities should the new leadership focus on to strengthen the Women's League and obviously advocate for women's rights and issues effectively? We do understand that new leadership will be announced at 6 p.m. this evening.
Yes, I think you can talk about three broad thematic areas that the new leadership would have to focus on. One is how to become relevant as an ANC Women's League to broader society, and I think the way that they can do that is to speak to the challenges that afflict women today in 2023 and be able to resolve some of those. And some of the challenges that afflict women is the fact that women still form the majority of people that are economically in precarious positions. Women still don't get a fair dividend of the economic life of the country, and women are still at the margins of economic activity in the country. So Women's League really needs to speak to that economic liberation and emancipation of women, but also the scourge of gender-based violence and femicide, which is the highest in South Africa than it is on the face of this planet, is something that the Women's League really needs to speak to. The other last thematic area that the Women's League really needs to look into is bringing a younger cohort of women into its leadership position so that they can be able to reflect the demographics of society within the leadership core of the Women's League. One of the challenges that I saw now in the top five is not a single woman under the age of 35 is contesting any of those top five positions. And I think the Women's League really need to bring the younger women into their leadership ranks.
Now, one of the things that the ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula spoke about yesterday, he encouraged the women in the Women's League to stand up for South African women under persecution, and he gave a number of illustrations. Right now, is this a conversation that's likely to be had by this new leadership? Is this something that they should be looking at as how do they fight for themselves as women and desist from the influence of men, or certainly some of these factions?
Yes, definitely. I think the Women's League needs to show more confidence and more faith in each other as women to occupy positions of leadership, and not always, as some people have criticized, always back men for these leadership positions. And the women as well need to speak to solidarity of women amongst each other. We've seen really concerning developments over the years. Hugo, you remember Malekambeche herself betraying women in 2017 and not throwing her weight behind the first woman to challenge for the presidency of the ANC NTZ at the time, and throwing her weight behind Cyril Ramaphosa at the last minute. And we've seen the ANC Women's League itself betray women when it did not endorse any of the women that had raised their hand in 2017 to challenge for the position of ANC President, Baleka Mbete being amongst them, Lindiwe Sisulu also being another person that raised their hand. So we need to see more solidarity amongst women, and women need to show a bit more faith and confidence in the ability of other women to be able to lead and be up to the task of leading this country, leading its institutions, and leading in society and in business.
Well, Lukhanyo, let's get your thoughts one more time, and this is on the local government elections and certainly the performance in the local government elections of the ANC and the likelihood of the party being forced into a coalition after the 2024 elections. How do you think this political landscape will impact the role of the ANC Women's League in the political landscape?
Women are the majority in this country. So if anyone is able to mobilize that base or mobilize that constituency, they stand a good chance of being able to win elections. And the ANC has really done a lot to, especially the ANC Women's League, to mobilize women behind the banner of the ANC. Women in the ANC are the most active on the ground grassroots level. If you see door to doors, you'll see a majority being women there. And other political parties have actually had a challenge mobilizing that constituency, Hugo. Research that the EFF has put into its own electoral fortunes have shown that women don't have a lot of trust in the EFF, and the EFF was going to work to resolve some of those issues that make them sort of unattractive to women. So one of the things that the ANC has as an advantage over the other political parties is its ability and the ability of its women to mobilize at a grassroots level. We see more women being involved in the life of the ANC than women in the political life of other political parties. And this is an advantage that the ANC can take into next year's elections, because they really have a constituency of women that are very active and are able to mobilize other women behind the banner of the ANC.
Unpacking the 2023 ANC Women's League National Conference, Lukhanyo Vangqa, political analyst. Appreciate your time this afternoon.